My name's John Burns. I'm the chairman of the board of the SETI Institute, and I've been called upon within the last 30 seconds to moderate this panel. So, with very little preparation, or as a matter of fact, none at all to speak of, I'm going to introduce the panelists. First, in absentia, is John Billingham, the former head of NASA's astrobiology unit and one of the great founders and fathers of SETI, who for health reasons at the last moment could not be here today. But we have a statement from him that will be read. Doug Vakoch, a senior scientist at the SETI Institute, whose field of study and expertise is in communicating to ET. So this is the one man in the world who has been thinking over and over again and in great depth about how and do we construct a message to send out to ET, either in response to a message that we've received or, as we're about to discuss today, whether we initiate that dialogue. Seth Shostak, senior astronomer of the SETI Institute, is our spokesman to the world. Seth, you've probably seen on the Colbert Report or heard him on Science Friday or the BBC or any other number of places. But he is, for the SETI Institute, he's our guy, our go-to guy. He runs our fantastic radio show, Are We Alone? Which if you have not downloaded it, you can find it at SETI.org or iTunes, or if you're here in the San Francisco Bay Area, it's on KALW, it's on NPR stations all over the country. It is an unbelievably entertaining, fun. It's Science Friday meets Car Talk meets This American Life or something. It's amazing, absolutely amazing. It only works. Robert Sawyer is probably needs no introduction to anyone here. He's a winner of the Hugo Award, Nebula Prize. He's a fantastic sci-fi writer. They don't get any better than this, but his particular focus in sci-fi is SETI. So if you want to just let the imagination run, but on a basis of hard science, you can't go to a better author than Robert Sawyer. All right, so guys, one at a time, 5 minutes each. Tell us, should we or should we not initiate dialogue with ET? Should we be the first ones to send out the signals? I'm going to start in abstention with John Billingham.
I hope you don't mean abstention, unless he's decided to just say no. Actually, John could not make it here. He sent a statement which I will read. John Billingham, by the way, was the gentleman who headed up the NASA SETI project for many years. And he's a physician from the UK. In January, Stephen Hawking did a show about aliens on the Discovery Channel. In his remarks about SETI, he said that there were two basic approaches. The first is to use telescopes to attempt to detect electromagnetic signals transmitted by an extraterrestrial civilization, which is actually the subject matter of much of this conference. The majority of searches carried out to date, numbering about 90, fall into this category, and form the basis of the long-term program of the SETI Institute as well as other organizations. The second approach is for us to transmit messages from Earth-promising star systems in the galaxy in the hope that they may be detected by extraterrestrial intelligent species who in turn might respond to us. This is messaging to extraterrestrial intelligence, METI. It is also known as active SETI. It has been used occasionally in the past, but is now proceeding apace under the aegis of Alexander Zaitsev at the Evpatoria telescope in the Ukraine. Hawking is concerned that it might be unwise to transmit. He reminded us that if our METI signal were to be detected by a civilization much older than we are, it might also have unlimited power, that civilization, with the ability, for example, to harness the entire output of its star, warp space, create wormholes, or travel huge distances in the blink of an eye. Statistically, it is likely that such a species would be much older than us because we are essentially the youngest communicating civilization in the galaxy. Arthur Clarke put it this way, quote, "Any sufficiently advanced technology would be indistinguishable from magic," unquote. It is impossible for us to know today what is the societal, cultural, political, and ethical makeup of such a society. As many have pointed out, they could be a benign and benevolent race whose main interest in the comparatively primitive beings of Earth, namely us, is to foster long-distance intellectual exchanges with kindness and munificence. I once gave a talk and suggested that this could be a possible outcome of SETI or METI, only to hear a voice from the back of the room say, "Don't count on it." Hawking is asking if they could pose any risk to us. He used an old analogy that past contacts between the peoples of Earth has frequently resulted in disastrous results for the less technologically advanced races, and quoted the unhappy fate of many of the indigenous tribes of the Caribbean in the centuries after Columbus first landed there. Similar devastating consequences have resulted in many places on Earth. If the extraterrestrial species encountered as a result of establishing future long-term METI endeavors of great magnitude and cost were somehow to fit this bill, what might become of us? We cannot be specific about the possible risks involved, but note Hawking's concerns that the other civilization might have powers that would be beyond our own understanding and interstellar mores and policies that are unknown. Perhaps the time has come to address these issues on an international scale by establishing a global conference on METI. Some have argued that many of our current radio transmissions leak out into the galaxy anyway and will be detectable at increasing distances with the passage of time and with the rise in transmitter powers by 1 to 2 orders of magnitude within a couple of decades. This just adds to any risk from METI itself. So perhaps we should have the global conference as soon as possible. Such an international gathering with experts and non-experts from all walks of life would cover a wide range of topics related to METI and SETI. Risk analysis would be a driver, but there is a long list of other topics. The science and engineering, standard passive SETI as it exists now, the study of historical analog sociological issues, national and international law, education and the media, and many more, which address different aspects of our human society here on Earth. The goal would be to try and reach a consensus on what to do about METI and leakage from Earth, and to reach an agreement on whether it should be just left in the hands of individuals or small groups or national organizations that just want to transmit for various reasons, or whether there might be informal or formal treaties between nations to take some sort of action to resolve the risk issue. Perhaps METI could be included in an amended version of the Outer Space Treaty. International conferences which lead to agreements happen all the time under various auspices. Often there is a leading organization which then inspires others to join in. There are many possibilities. For us, for example, the International Astronomical Societies, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the International Institute of Space Law, or the Royal Society. The UN Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space is an obvious candidate. In fact, the UN was earlier approached on a related issue by the International Academy of Astronautics, and he goes into some history. I'm going to skip to the last paragraph here because this is running a bit long, I think. I've done this only because Billingham can't be here, so this is the only time you're going to hear from him. Hawking did not say that there was a risk in just listening, the standard approach to SETI today. In fact, there is no innate risk in just listening. Regardless of how determined Zaitsev and others may be to undertake METI because they feel that conventional SETI is not working, it should be recognized that we still have only scratched the surface of the multidimensional search space of current SETI. Let's continue until we have at least excavated more of this huge search space. Let's have the global conference anyway to try to resolve the METI issues anyway, and soon. Let's see what the findings are. Note that no one can say that there is no risk to transmitting. Personally, I agree with Hawking, and am also worried that it may be unwise to transmit at least and until the global conference has actually taken place. As Michael Michaud has said, quote, if there are risks to METI or to transmitting back to them after we detect their signal, we could be neglecting our responsibility for the future well-being of mankind. Written by John Billingham and for SETICon.
Thank you very much. That's a very comprehensive, well thought out response. This will not be one of those, so you'll see the range of human ability to respond to SETI here, which I think is actually the core issue. We've all seen the film Contact. We all saw Jodie Foster give the impassioned speech trying to get funding for what she wanted to do about how SETI, if it succeeds, is going to be transformative for the human race. Last night, Frank Drake spoke passionately at the banquet that many of us attended and said that were SETI to succeed in its goals, it would be the end of old history. We'd have to close all those history books and start a new set of history books. It would be the single transformative moment for the entire species. That's one possible response, the Jodie Foster, Frank Drake approach. The other is, I think it was Tim Russ who said in a panel yesterday, it'll be one 24-hour news cycle and then it's gone and we're on to the next golf pro who can't keep it in his pants. And that'll be the big news story. Now, if the latter is true, doesn't make any difference in a lot of ways. If the former is true, that we really are talking about something that the whole human race will be transformed by, not just momentarily but forever, then the question becomes, who gets to make proactive, forward-moving steps towards changing the entire human race? There is no danger in passive listening, but there also has been zero success in passive listening as well. There are those, starting with Frank Drake, who felt it could devolve to a single individual or a small team of people to say, you know what, we will take it onto our own selves and decide we're going to do this without consultation, certainly not an international consultation, without government approval, and just kind of say, you know what, we're going to do it. Now, one of the big issues in SETI has long been, why have we failed for 50 years to find what we were looking for? The Fermi paradox, where are all the aliens? One possible answer that fits all of the biological and physical arguments we have for the universe should be teeming with life is that it is, but they're all bright enough to keep their mouths shut. And we're the idiots who are standing up saying, pick me, pick me, pick me, when the berserkers are looking for the next race to wipe out. Now, the easy argument is, well, we already announced ourselves and they've already all seen I Love Lucy and Adolf Hitler and all of that, so what harm can be done? Well, the reality is, as we well know from trying to decipher what previous civilizations on Earth had recorded in their documents, that it's an extraordinarily difficult task for even members of the same species to decode previously written documents and figure out what the intent and the content was. There's a very significant difference between sending I Love Lucy and watching Lucy and Ethel trying to eat the chocolates really fast off the conveyor belt before they fall off the end in that famous episode, and sending a map of the DNA molecule and an arrow pointing to the third planet from this particular star, Sol, and saying, you know, not only, I know you know we're generally here, you hear the noise from this region, it's actually this particular spot if you're looking for us, and hey, here's what we're made of. And if you don't actually approve of nascent DNA life forms who have broadcast noisily to the universe, when you do show up, send something that causes DNA to dissociate and break apart, and you'll just clear the infection from this planet very easily. There's a great difference between sending random content that even ourselves would have a great deal of decoding. If I sent you I Love Lucy and you didn't know anything about NTSC broadcasting or how to uncode that signal, you could spend half your life trying to figure out even that it was information content. There's a huge difference between that and saying, here we are, this is the exact spot, this is what we're made of, this is what we look like in case you happen to find us ugly, and do your damnedest, here we are. And it's more an issue to say, and we can decide to do that on the basis of a nonprofit organization in the Bay Area of California can decide to do it independently, individual nations can decide to do it independently, individual persons can decide to do it independently. So I think when Hawking said, you know, we got to stop and think about this, whether this is a wise thing to do, we have to recognize that, and as a science fiction writer, this is a crucial reality that we have faced over the years. The single biggest mistake science fiction made is this. It's not that we didn't predict the internet. It's not that we didn't predict that we weren't going to go to the, you know, we go to the moon in 1969, and 36 months later we decide, been there, done that, got the t-shirt, never going to do it again, right? It wasn't those failures, it was a systemic failure, which was we thought that the tiny segment of the population that reads science fiction had the same psychology as the rest of the human race. That the whole human race shared the science fictional vision that they wanted orbiting space stations and interplanet. I'm talking about 2001 here. They wanted the 2001 agenda. No, they wanted iPads and apps that they could play their games on constantly at home. And that's what we did with our culture and technology. And if I may use the word, the arrogance that can be, and I think Hawking does, fairly ascribed to the SETI movement is the belief that those of us who have self-selected out of 300 million Americans and a few foreigners, including myself, to come here, i.e. Maybe 500 out of 300 million, actually have the right to decide for, speak on the behalf of, and take transformative, world-changing, species-risking actions without consultation. Because, hey, we know better. And that actually is something that I think Hawking has very validly raised as a legitimate concern.
Okay, thank you for scaring the hell out of me. Okay. Seth Shostak.
Okay, I'm going to speak for myself, and I'm going to get emotional about this. First off, I got to say, are there any double E's in the audience? Any electronic engine? Do you think it would take you more than a week to figure out what the encoding is in NTSC signals? If it did, you probably don't have a job, right? Okay. All right. The reason I'm going to be emotional about this is because I happen to be the chair of the International Academy of Astronautics SETI Permanent Study Group. And for the last 3 to 4 years, we've had a very, very contentious discussion about this issue. Because John Billingham, whose statement I read earlier, and some others have suggested that we should put into the protocols, which are not laws. They are simply gentlemen's agreements, ladies' agreements if you prefer, among SETI organizations that wish to sign this document about what to do in case of a detection. And so they describe what to do in case of a detection. It's apple pie and motherhood. It says verify it, let the world know, right? And no response without international consultation. No response to anything you detect. But the suggestion was to put in another clause that said, wait a minute, no ab initio transmissions. In other words, don't start transmitting even before you've gotten a signal back. And I objected to that, and as it turns out that the committee eventually objected to that. It remains a contentious issue, and that's why it's come up again. Stephen Hawking actually made these statements many, many years ago. It's unclear whether it was 10 or 20 years ago, in fact, but because of the Discovery Channel needing some publicity, suddenly they're back in the news. I got an email, in fact, shortly thereafter from Lucy Hawking, his daughter, saying, you know, I'm not sure I agree with my dad on this. Okay, well, I don't agree with your dad on this either, in this sense. Let me just say what I think the problem is here. First, the idea that we can solve this problem with international consultation strikes me as naivete of the first water. How is international consultation supposed to decide, well, it might be okay to broadcast to them, or it might not be? Isn't that like asking the Aboriginals of Australia 20,000 years ago to sit around and decide, what should we do in case maybe the British land in Botany Bay 20,000 years ago, right? Or something like that. If we have international consultation, we'll be able to deal with that, right? Or at least consultation amongst the various tribes. I mean, I don't get that at all. It's fine to have international consultation, and as I've asked my colleague here, Doug Vakoch, on many an occasion, does that mean talking to the Swedish chess team about it? Is that international consultation? I don't even know what it means. But the idea that don't worry, Earth is protected because we've had international consultation. I find bizarre. I just find that bizarre. Okay, so that's point one. The second thing is that the whole idea that there may be a threat. If they pick up I Love Lucy, they don't like Fred Mertz's jokes, that they will then, therefore, destroy the Earth. There are two ways to look at it. One is you say, well, that's alien sociology. And our data set for alien sociology is very sparse, right? We have no idea what the aliens might be interested in doing. And as, again, Doug has said to me many times, he said, you know, and if they were going to do something hostile to this planet's been around for 4.5 billion years. Why did they wipe out the dinosaurs or the trilobites?
Actually.
Yeah, oh, they did. There you go. Maybe I should stop here. Right, but there is a point. There is a point here. That means that we are singularly interesting in terms of provoking them to do something terrible, right? Which I think is a little bit self-centered, but okay, maybe they don't want competition in the used car market. I don't know, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. The other thing is, and this is the point I made in a little op-ed piece in New Scientist a couple of weeks ago, because I feel strongly about this. Whatever you think of the danger, a lot of people say, look, it's shouting in the jungle. Why risk it? Why risk it? You don't know. Maybe they're hostile. Maybe they're not hostile. Maybe they just want to enlighten us. Who knows what they want to do? But don't shout in the jungle. That's what I hear from some of my other colleagues. Don't shout in the jungle. Could be dangerous. Well, I wouldn't recommend that you shout in the jungle. But the facts are that we've already shouted. And people will say, wait a minute. Though those TV signals leaking into space, those are so weak that it's very, very difficult to detect and so forth. That's true. Our SETI experiments couldn't pick up our TV more than much less than a light year away. Right? They are hard to detect, but they're only hard to detect for us 100 years after Marconi. Any society any society that has the capability of threatening us by either coming here and, blowing up the Earth, which, by the way, takes a lot of energy, or just launching their photon cannons in our direction, which, just fries the landscape, or whatever it is you think they're going to do. Anybody who can do that has gone more than 100 years beyond their Marconi. They can do what Frank Drake is talking about at this conference and people have talked about for 20 years. They can use their star as a gravitational lens. And you can work out what they can pick up with that. And it turns out very easily. They could pick up all the TV, of course, but they could pick up the street lamps from our cities. Okay? So, and that signal, those signals, have been going out into space for 70 years. And you can say, oh, well, but there's nothing hostile in I Love Lucy or Howdy Doody. Well, I don't think it matters. Does it matter? Are they going to say, oh, well, no, wait a minute, this show is pretty good. Let's not launch it again. I mean, the incredible naivete here just boggles my mind. So the point is this. This horse has left the barn. This bell has been rung. Any society that could possibly be a threat to us can easily know 70 years in advance of anything we do in the future, at least, that we're here, right? So there's no point in losing sleep about this. Finally, if I turn it over to a reasonable guy, let me just point out that if you buy into this, if you think that somebody, whether it's the SETI community, obviously the SETI community shouldn't be doing this, we're not law enforcers, but that somebody should be trying to enforce an injunction against you transmitting into space, against you going out into the sky tonight with your laser pointer, aiming it at Betelgeuse and typing out what hath God wrought in Morse code. They want to stop you from doing that, right? If they want to do that, then what they're also going to have to do is shut down the radar sets at San Jose Airport, not to mention JFK, which may be no loss, but when you set it down, San Jose, that means you can't land at night or in the fog or anything else, right? Obviously shut down the BBC, NBC, CBS. I mean, maybe that's really no loss, but what you are doing is you are circumscribing the activities. Space colonies, no transmissions. You are circumscribing the activities of us, not for this generation, not for the next 10 years, forever. Forever. And I think that paranoia is not the inheritance we should be giving to our descendants.
Doug. Would you unboggle our minds for us, please?
I like it that Seth began by acknowledging how emotional this issue could be, because I think that's often where it has left. And I think the focus of Hawking's concern that the big reason not to transmit is a fear of annihilation by another civilization really actually obscures much more important issues. So let me take a few minutes to highlight why I think the international SETI community actually should be doing active SETI. Now, what I'm going to argue essentially is there are a number of assumptions for why we shouldn't be doing active SETI, and that they may well hold for a lot of civilizations, like those civilizations that are advanced enough to come here through interstellar travel, but there may be other civilizations that don't follow our assumptions. And so basically I'm suggesting a research diversification strategy. It's something very much along the lines of what happened a decade ago. In the beginning of SETI 50 years ago, we searched only for radio signals. And then about a decade ago, we realized, hey, we can look for brief nanosecond laser pulses. And so we now expanded to optical SETI. I would suggest there are good reasons to expand over the next 50 years into including active SETI searches to complement our existing SETI searches. And I think it's important not to take what I'm saying as in any way suggesting that somehow this last 50 years of silence has been a failure. I think that actually just reflects a lack of understanding of the magnitude of the search, and that it very plausibly could take decades for a traditional passive SETI search to succeed. I know we're running short on time, so let me be brief, but what I want to do is highlight about 5 interrelated reasons that have been given for why we shouldn't be doing active SETI. That these are the concerns that have been more of a reason that scientists don't want to do active SETI than the concern that Hawking has raised about a fear of a takeover. Now, one thing that you've heard sometimes over the course of this convention is the idea that if we make contact with another civilization, it's likely to be much longer lived than we are. And the reason for that is it has to be that way just on purely statistical grounds for the whole thing to work. You know, now, it could be that other civilizations only have the ability to communicate for, say, 100 years, and then they annihilate themselves, or they turn inward, and they stop trying to communicate. But if that's true, then over the 13+ billion year history of this galaxy, it's an infinitesimal chance that their 100 years and our 100 years are going to overlap. You know, it's kind of like over the course of an entire night, 2 fireflies each flick on for a second. What's the chance that's going to happen at the same time? So for our current searches to succeed, where we're looking for signals coming in, it means they've probably been transmitting thousands, even millions of years. That's why we assume that they are older than we are. Now, we also often make a second assumption that with greater age comes incredibly increased technological capability. For many civilizations, that may be the case, but I'd argue maybe not for some. Maybe long-lived, stable civilizations have modest energy consumption, modest capabilities, and so that they're really not going to be doing a lot of the heavy lifting. That, in fact, is one of the reasons that, in fact, Seth has given sometimes for why we should be focusing on listening instead of transmitting. Let ET do the heavy lifting. And that's great for me if they're willing to do it. My concern is that there may be some out there who are saying, well, wait, if you're the young guys, you've got a lot more to gain from this than we do. Why don't you take the initiative? Ron Bracewell once suggested the metaphor of a galactic club. That's what we're trying to do in SETI, is to become members of this sort of a galactic federation of planets. And people talk about trying to get in the Galactic Club, but no one, it seems, ever talks about paying your dues. And so maybe that's what we need to do. At least submit an application for it. And maybe I Love Lucy doesn't count. So maybe we need to let them know that we want to get in. Another objection to active SETI that I've heard is, you know, we will have no way of anticipating their galactic protocol. Well, but in that assumption is the idea that, you know, part of the galactic protocol is that they're going to be transmitting. So really, maybe that galactic protocol is the less advanced civilization should take the initiative. And again, these arguments don't have to hold for all civilizations. What I'm suggesting is there may be some civilizations that don't fit the standard assumptions, and that's a good enough reason to go ahead with active SETI, providing we can assure ourselves that the benefits outweigh the risks. A third common assumption, objection to active SETI is that there is no need to transmit now. Seth has just mentioned this. So the idea of gravitational lensing, even our weak leakage radiation could be detected if you use the sun as an amplifier. Well, that's great. If you have the technology to send a satellite out 550 times the distance of the Earth from the sun, that's pretty far out. And that's great. That gives you a line to one point in space. But if you want to cover the entire celestial sphere, either that's a lot of different satellites, or those things are really tooling around, and that's quite a distance. So again, I don't discount the possibility that a very advanced civilization would have that capability, but I think we should also open up the possibility of contact with less advanced civilizations, ones intermediate between our abilities and those super civilizations.
Yeah, Robert, I wonder, do you disagree with anything you've heard here today?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, the panel would be uninteresting if I didn't take a contrarian point of view. I'm obviously I wouldn't be here if I wasn't pro-SETI. They're not letting, you know, to decry this as front to Jesus. So I'm here because I represent part of this camp here. But that said, there are a couple of very interesting things that Doug said. One of the things that we should be doing is let them know that we want to be part of the Galactic Club. And that's true for sufficiently small values of we. I'm not sure that the 7 billion people on the planet have actually had a plebiscite on whether they want to join this particular club. And I actually wrote a science fiction short story a couple of years ago called Flashes about, it starts off with a police officer who's investigating a spate of suicides amongst researchers at universities. And why are all these researchers killing themselves? Well, we got Carl Sagan's dream. Guess what? The beneficent aliens are beaming the Encyclopedia Galactica, an article a day to us in alien alphabetical order, so you never know what's going to come next. And lo and behold, Luke, quantum gravity isn't even close to being right to describing the reality of the universe. You devoted your whole academic career to this thing, and here's the right answer. Oh shit, well that was a wasted career. And you know what? Here's how actually information theory really works on large scales. Oh, well there goes a whole industry. And you know what? Here's this, this, and this. And actually it turns out to be the worst thing that could ever happen to the intellectual enterprise of the human race is you guys, as Feynman, I think it was, someone famously said, was it Feynman? You're not even wrong. You're so far off base, you're not even wrong. And that's a big wake-up call when you have this thing where we think we are questing and curious, and when it's just, no, wrong, 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 stupid, dumb, wrong, stupid is what you hear from the sky every day for the rest of eternity, because you don't know how big the encyclopedia is going to be, is actually an interesting issue. Doug also alluded to the fact that, you know, it doesn't matter what, and it actually, forgive me Doug, but it was somewhat contradictory. There's a galactic club. Well, what is a club but a unitary, a federation where we've agreed between civilizations on a code of conduct. Otherwise it's not a club, it's just a random aggregation. There's some either monolithic galactic entity we can join, or as you said, there are a variety of cultures and civilizations out there, and we may not be doing what the majority want, but there'll be a minority. If you have a sufficiently large number of civilizations, there'll be a minority. And the fear that Hawking and others have articulated, and is worth mentioning, is that there's only one civilization that is so xenophobic, and my goodness, we have a lot of experience with highly evolved, intelligent individuals who are xenophobic in this culture, and decide that it is an affront to their belief system that anything else claims to be sentient or intelligent, and those things should be wiped out. The question is, if there are aberrant civilizations, you only need one who's taken it as their mission with technology, not just 100, but 1,000 or 1,000,000 years more advanced than ours, that they're going to wipe out the upstarts. And again, that raises the question of, hey, when we don't know what their response is going to be, should we be, as Seth said, although he was against it, shouting against a prescription of it, shouting in the forest.
Seth, what do you say?
I say we ought to go to the audience.
All right, well, Doug, do you want to say anything before we go to the audience?
You make a good point about my use of the Galactic Club metaphor. There was a very weak connection between that and the other argument. So really, I was assuming there could be many different viewpoints of other civilizations.
Maybe I will say just one thing. The idea of a galactic club I find a difficult one because that assumes that there are a whole bunch of societies out there that are more or less at our level. You probably don't, you may be belonging to some clubs, bowling clubs, book clubs, whatever, but you probably don't invite the aphids to join, right? And they actually don't differ from you too much in, cosmic time in terms of their point of evolution. So unless societies evolve, very quickly, like 10th century or something like that throughout the galaxy, there are no real club members.
All right, let's open it up, please.
So I find it interesting that we automatically assume that the alien intelligence will be more intelligent than us, but it seems much more plausible to me that it would be like an extremely long-running blog or the worst reality TV. We would get their I Love Lucy and their repeats of all of their society, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands of years, as we get their data stream of their society growing up. And just like they're getting ours, and what an influence that would have on our culture. Do you have any thoughts about, if we were to start receiving alien signals, given the popularity of reality TV?
Well, I do have a thought on that, because we dismissively referred to I Love Lucy repeatedly. But in fact, there's very little value in saying, you know what, the value of pi over here is 3.14, blah, 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 blah. Is it that over there as well? And waiting 500 years for the response. Yep, same thing here. Cool. Wow, we have a club going now. Way more interesting to say, here's our art, our culture, our music, our paintings. And if we can find some way to encode them in a way that might be readable by somebody else, our literature. Here's who we are. What's way more interesting to share is what's here in the human heart than which is going to be shared by everybody, what the basics of physics and chemistry are that we've deduced in our human brains.
All right, please.
Yeah, just up the road is another conference, the Singularity Summit.
Isn't that interesting, the same
Where
weekend?
they make the
Where do the
assumption
nerds
that
go this weekend? Which one?
they make the assumption though that when you get to a certain level, very rapidly you move to a singularity where it becomes asymptotically advanced. And it seems to me that we're all assuming that there will be continuous evolution of species towards more and more technologically sophisticated, where in fact it's possible that when they get to our level, very quickly they move to a singularity, which we can't imagine what that would be like. And I was wondering if you could just comment on the possibility that these aliens might all be very similar to each other because they've reached that singularity, whatever that is.
I don't think so. The Singularity University was founded by Ray Kurzweil. You all know Ray Kurzweil? You should know Ray Kurzweil. Ray is a very optimistic sort of guy. He's waiting for within 10 years, you see the computers in your washing machine will start talking to the computers in the fridge, and they'll decide they don't need you anymore. They might say, well, let's work together and take over. We're going to do the dishes ourselves. Whatever. I don't know. But another thing that Ray says, of course, is that he's figuring that within the next 5-10 years, we're going to increase life expectancy by more than 1 year per year, and that means he's going to live forever. So I hope he's investing in real estate. Anyhow, but the point about the singularity is, I think, just the opposite of what you suggested. You suggested that it will lead to a situation where everybody's more or less at the same level, right? I don't think that's what happens at all. I think what happens is that to the extent that you have a singularity, I mean, that's just saying Moore's law is going to go on forever, and of course it won't. No exponential law goes on forever. They always saturate out. Something happens. But it may be that within 50 years you've invented thinking machines, shifted the paradigm, as we love to say here in the Silicon Valley, and now suddenly the idea of intelligence being a 3-pound slow-speed computer operating on salt water in your brain, right, that becomes antiquated, kind of quaint, and 100,000 years from now, the real sentience of this part of the galaxy will look back, hey, do you remember Zork when they had biological intelligence? Oh, right, I read about that somewhere. I don't know, right? But the point here is that to the extent that once you have synthetic intelligence, that can itself improve very, very quickly. And that's the experience with technology here. It's not Darwinian. Darwinian is kind of random and very unpredictable and slow, very slow. Whereas, look at what happens to computers, right? Once you get technological intelligence going, it evolves very quickly. And I think what that says is that once you do that, assuming you do it, and once you do it, that it's winner take all, at least in this part of the universe, that nobody can catch up because you're moving along at some very fast rate. And those guys got started, 20 million years after you, they never catch up. And so there are dominant sentients in any given part of the galaxy. Maybe it's a good story, man. But anyhow, something like that. So I don't think it leads to a leveling.
Let me go way to the back, fellow in the black shirt, but boom with your voice, okay?
Yeah, I'll do my best. I have a question, actually. Hawking clearly is with the biologists on this. You said his comments were 10 to 20 years old. I didn't know that. But why is it that biologists like Richard Dawkins and Jared Diamond, who's sort of a biologist, are very, very pessimistic about aliens wanting to eat our brains and marry our women or whatever? And astronomers are pretty sanguine about it, in that we're all going to hang out and drink together or something.
When you say they're pessimistic, you mean they don't want to eat our brains or they do want to eat our brains? They do.
I'm very pessimistic. The astronomers are all thinking that we're all going to be in the same fraternity.
I think astronomers think that. I think they think it, Liam. I think astronomers are mostly agnostic. In my experience, people in astronomy don't worry too much about what the aliens are going to be like. This is an issue that hasn't really roiled the astronomical community.
Doug, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I agree. Well, there's often the assumption that in order to be a long-lived civilization, you need to have gotten your warlike instincts under control. Now, I think there's a certain plausibility about that. On the other hand, we know of civilizations here on Earth that are very benevolent toward others within their own society, but can be malevolent to other civilizations, other cultures as well. So I think the more relevant question is, regardless of the motivation or the interest in an extraterrestrial, would they have any plausible motivation? Even if they tend to be kind of hateful, hostile folks, can they do us any harm at interstellar distances?
Yeah, I had a question regarding natural resources. It would seem that in history, most migrations, both violent and otherwise, have been based on the search for natural resources. So given that, how would that temper the panel's views on interstellar or intergalactic travel?
You know, the panel that was here the hour before, Andre Ormanis, who was science advisor for Star Trek, was talking about what was the fight that he lost in Star Trek, all the shows that he worked on. And it was in the pilot of Voyager, when there was an implication that aliens were coming to Earth to take our water. And of course, water is hydrogen and oxygen, common elements in the universe, easy to manufacture. If you don't have enough at home, it's still easy to make in your local solar system. You'd never go hunting for it. To me, it's almost inconceivable that there is a material resource that's worth traveling light years to collect. The energy required to collect it will always be more expensive than the cost of making it at home. Again, I come back to the only thing that's worth exchanging is culture, which has no material value, but can be infinitely enriching in other ways.
Yeah, at the risk of discombobulating this panel, I have to say I agree with Ron. Because, I wrote a review of Avatar, right? And unobtainium was $20 million a kilogram. Was that the price, right? That was the price. Now, you got to back calculate that to today's dollars. But then also figure out how much does it cost in energy to get that kilogram back here within 10 years. And apparently their rockets could do it in 10 years. It's 4.5 light years to Pandora. Okay, so there you just worked out that energy cost figure. You can buy it at 10 cents a kilowatt hour, which you couldn't here in the Bay Area from PG&E. All right, that worked out. The cost of the energy to transport that unobtainium was so far beyond the value of the unobtainium, it was completely analogous to you ordering a book from Amazon and paying $60,000 for the shipping. You probably won't do it.
Yes, please.
Since there's probably a likelihood that we may not be around when the answer comes back, or someone is there any value to having some sort of a Kilroy was here kind of passive marker or a beacon on an outer rocky moon or something saying, that would survive, say, the Earth being annihilated or all traces of us all of us vanishing. So is there any value to that, and what would it look like?
I think there is. In fact, one of the strongest objections to mounting a serious active SETI program is we won't be around in order to get the reply. So if you measure the success of an active SETI program by our progeny, our great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren get a reply, then that requires that the other recipients get that the extraterrestrials get it, and then they send something back, and that our great-great-great-grandkids be around. But if you define success in terms of the same sort of criteria that we're expecting extraterrestrials to have, which is sort of sharing information with other civilizations, then it becomes plausible. And if the concern is that we're in some sort of danger, then we're in a lot less danger if we're not around at all. So I mean, I think you can always argue, any civilization can argue that you're not old enough. I mean, I can imagine a million-year-old civilization saying, well, we'll wait until we're 10 million years old before we start transmitting. And it could be the audacious young civilizations that actually start the transmitting scheme. But I think even if we do start transmitting, I think another thing that we can do is we provide a lot of great data for extraterrestrial sociologists. One of the big factors in the Drake equation that's most difficult to estimate is L, the longevity of civilization. If we start transmitting systematically and then for whatever reason stop, that's going to give at least one data point to extraterrestrial sociologists to figure out how long did this civilization last in its transmission stage.
I would say the idea of a legacy, by the way, is a very good one. It's been pointed out many times that, for example, the Pioneer and the Voyager spacecraft are, in a sense, legacies of humanity. Also, the things that have been landed on the moon, the weather on the moon is fairly mild, or at least it doesn't change much. So things can last a long time. And in fact, there have been planned projects to put, if you will, a time capsule on the moon, exactly for the reasons you're suggesting. And there's a guy down in Southern California, out in the desert, monuments and stuff. Yeah, he's carving, the whole history as he understands it in stone. There, on the assumption that stone tends to have a long lifetime.
Ma'am? Yes.
Since we're looking for intelligences that have some vastly different level of development than we have in all probability, are you also at least looking at the literature and things of understanding different intelligences here on Earth, like animals and things? Because if we they don't have the same kind of languages and concerns that we do, but even an animal as simple as a crocodile can get the concept of a name of an individual, which indicates that for a very long time we've had some kind of innate linguistic, very crude ability among Earth creatures. Are you guys looking at, say, studies of the way parrots communicate in their flocks, or the way cats and dogs interact with their human companions? Because it seems to me, if we're trying to figure out how an alien who's very different in development from us would communicate, looking at how the semi-alien intelligences on Earth communicate might help us.
I would just insert here that we do have people at the SETI Institute who study precisely that, on the theory that if we can't even communicate with a parrot or a whale with whom we share an entire planet and a genome up until some X number of tens of millions of years ago, how are we going to communicate with ET? But Doug here, I think, is the closest expert here today. So, Doug, why don't you start?
Well, I think that we can do a lot of work with comparative psychology. So one of the big challenges that we have is to anticipate aliens who are different from us. Human beings rely very much on a sense of vision and a sense of hearing. If you look at how much of our brain is used to process those sensory modalities, those are the dominant ones. And much of the way we think about our world is dictated by the fact that that's how we're gathering sensory information. One of the things about those two particular senses is that in both hearing and in vision, we're able to localize objects in space very distinctly. And that's not the case with, say, a sense of smell. Same with time. Something is either here in this room or someone is gone. They were here earlier, they're going to be here in the future. Past, present, future are distinct. Imagine an olfactory creature where there may be a more graded sense of time, or maybe mathematics isn't even a discrete mathematics, but it makes sense to say on that world 2 + 2 equals approximately 2 + approximately 2 equals approximately 4. So I think looking for analogs here on Earth of other animals, there's only so much we can do by imagination, but there's so many other creatures here on Earth that encounter the world with other sensory modalities. That's a good starting point.
Can I say something?
Yeah, sure.
The question of L, the final term in the Drake equation, the lifetime of a technological civilization, came up. And there was a gentleman over here who brought up the Singularity Institute right here, and the Singularity Summit that's going on right now. One of the interesting issues to me about L and the singularitarian point of view is this, and also it goes to the heart of what we talk about when we talk about SETI. Your radio show is called Are We Alone? And we talk about wanting to have a conversation with and talk to others. There very much is a notion of individuals, discrete individuals. You even in your far future said, do you remember Zork 10,000 years ago when we were made out of meat? There was Zork to have a conversation with. One of the great dangers to our civilization, the thing that may define the other end of L, we know when L began, it began in 1895. The radio was invented. When does L end in terms of a technological civilization? It may be, and it might be, indeed, our epitaph is that we're a data point for some future sociologist, that's 100 or 500 years is the lifespan. What's going to kill this civilization? It may be ecological collapse. Will it be a nuclear holocaust between two warring factions? Or will it be an act of terrorism? That is the defining limit on a civilization the amount of time after great powers have devolved to individuals, biological warfare powers, nuclear warfare powers, to individuals, for how long you allow there to be differing opinions in your society, and is in fact the most dangerous thing to the long-term survival of a race, individuality, with some of it being aberrant psychology. So you get the Star Trek Borg metaphor, which is, why does the Borg Queen want to absorb every life form she encounters into this collective? Because no one in the collective is a dissenter. No one in the collective is a suicide bomber. No one in the collective is going to take the red matter and blow up the universe. The collective is secure because there is no individuality. So the thing that post-singularitarian civilizations may converge on is in fact a lack of individuality. And this notion that we need someone to talk to may very much be an adolescent notion of species that are instantiated in diverse individuals. When we join the Galactic Club, we may find there only is one we in the whole universe, and it is an absorptive collective, because the alternative is short-lived civilizations that will ultimately fall to crazy individual acts of terrorism.
Interesting. I know you go ahead. No, the woman behind you.
I have just a question for Robbie. If you have opportunity to invite your extraterrestrial quest around the world and a special place where you will invite them, you know, there will be some kind of contact between you and them, and about the safety, not only you but others. Did you think about that?
We don't, I don't even know if I can repeat the question. I think I got the gist of it, is where would I, if I had the opportunity to invite the people to have this international confrontation, Guardians up there, consultation, who would I invite and where would I bring them? And the answer is, you know what? We're not going to resolve the abortion issue by saying, everybody who's pro-choice, come over here, let's have a conversation. And we'll vote, and that'll solve the issue. What you have to do is a plebiscite. If it's a worldwide, species-transforming moment in which we close the old history books and start new with a fresh page, you don't invite individuals who either you have selected or have self-selected to participate in that process. If it affects everybody, it ultimately devolves to be something that has to be decided by national plebiscites that are aggregated into a global plebiscite.
All right, well, no, I'll take it. I'm sorry.
I like to call this the V'ger conundrum, like after the spacecraft V'ger in the first Star Trek movie, fairly malevolent. It may be that the good guy club and the Galaxy Club is benevolent and wholesome and they're good guys, but what we may meet first is a probe they've sent out that's kind of single-minded, that just wants to sterilize rock samples and collect data from aim probes or something like that. So is that a thing we have to worry about?
Well, let me give you a little parallel here, because I think this is very similar, actually. And what I look for when we talk about this, and we're all gung-ho, and I would love to talk to aliens and meet them, but what are the principal distinctions, okay? Suppose that instead of being a bunch of astronomers here, we're a bunch of biochemists. And one of the biochemists says, you know what, the single scourge of humanity is viruses. Viruses are bad, they're evil, they reproduce, they take over our biology. I've got a system that I've developed here that's going to rid humanity of viruses. And I think it's going to be all to the good, it'll be transformative, the end of viral caused disease, a whole new chapter in human history, entirely beneficent. I'm going to do it, I'm going to introduce it into the water supply without government or public consultation. And oh, by the way, it goes wrong, and it turns out it doesn't just destroy viruses, it also destroys RNA, which is important for the transcription of DNA and reproduction. And guess what? It's the worst disaster in the human race. And what do we say at the end of that? We say, but you know, scientists should be able to do what they think is best without any oversight. What's the principal distinction between the scenario I just described and the scenario of active SETI being initiated by a small self-selected group?
I'll take one last question, maybe on this side. We haven't been to this side for a while. Last chance this side, okay. One on the other side. One last question, sure, please. Yes.
Yeah. What people keep talking about L as it's a one-time thing, that civilization rises, radio transmits, and then it dies. No one seems to talk about it up and down in cycles. I mean, civilizations rise and fall. Chinese civilizations risen and fallen. Just because we get to a bad spell where, we exhausted resources and got into global war, but, you kill 99% of the human population is an awful lot less, and so it rises again, and extra solar, yeah.
Albert Einstein famously said, I don't know what weapons World War III will be fought with, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. When you knock out a technological civilization, you really knock it for a loop for a long time.
I gotta end with an up. You can't leave me with that. Call me Pangloss. No, I don't think that's. I think if you knocked out 99% of the world, it wouldn't take, another 150,000 years to get back to where we are. Of course not, because you had the legacy of that information. But beyond that, let me just suggest something about L. What happens is you invent radio and you go on the air, so now maybe somebody can detect you. At the same time, you invent the H-bomb, within 50 years, right? You invent it. So now maybe you have a chance of going off the air with a lot of mushroom and cloud activity, right? Okay, but at the same time that you invent the H-bomb, you invent rockets, for the very practical reason that you need something to carry the H-bombs around, okay? Once you've invented rockets, you're within 100 or 200 years of at least having some settlements beyond your native planet. We're not doing it now, but remember, Jerry O'Neill said that by the 1990s there'd be tens of millions of you living in colonies, orbiting colonies around the Earth. Hasn't happened because it's still cheaper to build condos in Arizona, but it didn't have to be that way, and at some point it won't be that way, and maybe it'll take to the end of the century, maybe it'll take to the end of the next century. It doesn't matter. It's going to happen within a few hundred years after inventing the H-bomb. So the point is you have a bottleneck during which maybe you're vulnerable to self-destruction. I think all the same arguments could be made in terms of environmental catastrophe too, by the way. That there's this bottleneck where you're in danger for a while. And maybe we don't get through it, but I can hardly believe that nobody gets through it. And so I think that the point is that once you're dispersed, you can't get rid of everybody, right? And it's just very hard to get rid of everybody when some of them are on Mars and some of them are in orbiting. So I honestly think that the future, if not of Homo sapiens, because we're just soft, squishy intelligence, but at least of the culture that Rob keeps talking about here, I think it's thumbs up. We're in for the long haul.
And Doug, do you want to have one last word?
I'm all for the long haul too.